My name is Stan Bevan. I'm from the community of Kitsalas out in Terrace. My mother is Tahltan Tlingit from Telegraph Creek, and my father is a Tsimshian from Kitsalas. I was born in Terrace. How I got interested in art was my uncle's an artist, Dempsey Bob, and then as a teenager I was able to visit and do some work with him to be introduced to the art. And when I finished high school, I had an opportunity to go to Kasan in Hazelton. So I took that opportunity. First I phoned my uncle and said, would it be okay if I work with you after I finished this course in Hazelton? He said that would be no problem. So I took the course, and then when I completed the course, I apprenticeshiped to my uncle. This was in 1979 is when I went to Kasan. And by 1987, the market had started for Northwest Coast art in BC, and I was part of getting into the first galleries that were actually selling art. And I began to make my living in 1987 through art. So that's pretty well what I've done all my life as being an artist from right out of high school. I've also was encouraged to teach when I was first started learning. So I went off and I taught in my mother's home community of Telegraph Creek. In my own community of Kitsalas and the community of Kitsim-Kalem. And then after that I went up to Alaska and taught Alaska and Yukon and other parts of BC. The inspiration for these woodcuts are, I've been interested in woodcut. I got introduced to woodcut by a gallery. A gallery mentioned it. And then when I went to Alaska, one of the places I was teaching, they mentioned it too, but I never did do anything. Well, that was in the 90s, but I didn't do anything until 2010 when I took a trip to Japan, and I got to meet some of the woodblock artists in Japan, the traditional artists. And so when I came home, I began experimenting and learning off of YouTube how I began working with. Once I figured it out, I just started putting all my designs together and started working on putting them together. Woodcut printing is skills that I've learned over the years since I've started. So by learning two-dimensional carving, which is learning how to cut and carve the blocks, learning the designing, and learning the sculpture, because I adapt sculpture and design into each of the blocks. So I'm sort of trying to make it a unique by giving it a different feel, because I found once I started it, I couldn't do traditional because of the technique and the style of the woodcut. So I had to go, and to me, I had to sort of create a style that would work with the paper, that would work with the printing, and that would make it work together. So that's why I worked towards it, and it developed into the contemporary, and I call it contemporary archaic. So I'm trying to get the very ancient look, but in a contemporary time of now. So that's how I started designing, and as I develop, I start seeing more and more ways of adapting this type of design work into the woodcut. So the one I'd like to talk about first is the one that's on the poster for the exhibit, and I picked that one because it's been picked by the the Natural History Museum in New York, and they're opening it in this coming fall 2021, and they're having an exhibit at the same time, and they're including this print in the exhibit because they've mentioned that it's a very new contemporary style, and they really enjoy it, and it'll fit into the exhibit that they're having this year. So that's why I put it on front, because it made it to the Natural History Museum in New York. And this design, it started out with this is an old design that I put in my sketchbook, and when I started printing, I started re-looking at all my designs when I started printing, and this one came up, and I changed it a bit, and I adapted it so that it was printable with the woodcut. And What it is there's a human, a grizzly bear, and an eagle, and they're holding salmon, and I call it the dependence because they're all dependent on the salmon. The salmon's very important for in the north, and these are some of the main people that are dependent on the salmon, the bear, the eagle, and the humans, and a lot of things that go underneath that too. So that's why I call it the dependence. Well, okay, let's talk about that one. Well, when I was first beginning, I wanted to use different colors. So when you're using different colors, you have to use a separate block for each color, and then you have to register each color on when you're printing. And so my challenge was to do a colored block, and the first one I did was 3 colored block. And by what I learned from watching off YouTube how the Japanese lined up their prints, I worked out a system that worked in the same way, but not exactly the way they use it, but I used the way they register their prints. And I was able to get my first print turned out very close to what I wanted, and it was the northern man. It was the 3-color print, and I was quite successful in lining that up, and I thought I had figured it all out, but then my next colored prints were all off, so I had to go back and refigure everything else out. And what I found out was I was doing it all in reverse from my first print. So once I figured out the system again, I was able to line everything back up again. So I think I have it figured out now. But yes, that was a challenge to use multicolors. And the most rewarding one was the dependence. That it's been really well received by a lot of people collecting the art, and they like the contemporary look. They think it's they've spoken with me, and they think it's a new way of looking at Northwest Coast art. It's a new style for it. So, and a lot of that comes from the drawing over the years, and it's part of sculpture and 2-dimensional designing. I've used a lot of that in like panel design, sculpture panel designs. I use those sort of type of look and feel to create these prints. They come from, some of them come from little stories that I have just at being somewhere, or somebody saying something like the print called the challenge, and it's 2 frogs dancing, and I was attending a feast, and one of the dance groups did a challenge dance, and that's where I got the idea of doing the challenge, because I already had these drawings. I just redid them and adapted them to the woodcut, and the ideal of the challenge came up because of the challenge dance. So I designed that one after a dance. With this type of designing, it's a little trickier because I'm having to make thin lines that we don't use traditionally are used in our traditional art. So I'm using like fine, clear, negative lines to bring out different areas of the art. So it's similar, but it's a little bit different. The blocks they don't take too long. It could take maybe a week at the most to do 2 or 3 days to carve it out. But it takes me weeks or months to get a nice design that I'm happy with, because I can draw it, and then I'll look at it, and I always don't rush into a design. I'll take my time and go over it for a few days or a few weeks and make sure that I'm happy with the design. And then once the design is done, it's the carving and then the printing. Well, watching the tools that I've chosen are different from the traditional tools that I use for my traditional art that I do, because I've watched the Japanese with the tools that they use and how they use the tools, and so I purchased a few of those tools and I started practicing the way they did their cuts, and I found that their techniques work very well with their tools. So I've adapted a Japanese technique of use of tools and tools for the woodcut, and it only makes sense because of how the tools are shaped and how they work. Well, the traditional comb is one of the first ones. The actual it was my first practice one in 2013. That's the original edition is 2013, and it was an edition of 25. And I did it on just an ordinary piece of block of wood. I had some ink and a roller and some paper, and that was my first experiment on actually making a print. So I used the ideal of a comb and traditional designing, and I put it together and printed it, and it wasn't quite what I wanted, and it took me a few more years until I finally was comfortable in understanding how to use woodblock properly. But the traditional comb was my first experiment with the woodcut. Well, within was my second print. I had the design. I had the design for a long time, but that's where I started realizing that I can start using a different style for woodcut designing that would be adaptable to the mulberry paper and the ink and just the look of a woodcut. So once I put that together, I was able to start freely starting to design, because I felt that would work. So and I called it Within, because anything you want to do comes from within you. So, and that one too, when I did it, I set it aside for a few years until I figured out properly how to do it, because I wasn't comfortable just putting something out that wasn't to proper specifications of the art, and even with a nice clean and an even, and so I was looking for that look. And then when I finally found what I learned is that yes, you can teach yourself, but a teacher is the best way of learning. A teacher can answer your questions, and so I found out how important a teacher was, being a teacher. Within, it's a killer whale with a human inside the whale. So the human is within the whale, but I use that as the within. Get Back Up is a design that I was working on, and then I came up with the name as I was working on it. I like that one to be interpreted by whoever looks at it. But to me, get back up means continue getting back up. Fall down 9 times, get back up 10 times. So it's just something that inspires people to know that it's okay to get back up.